Welcome to Corralling the Chaos podcast, where we talk publicly about the things you're worried about privately. My name is Angela Alea, and I'm your host. This is the event industry podcast for companies and crew, where we're going to dive deep into things like what does our industry need that it just doesn't have? What are the things you want to know, but you're just too afraid to ask? And what are the biggest opportunities ahead for our industry? We're going to go deep, and nothing is off limits. Welcome back to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Today, we want to talk about the chaos that often occurs at show sites and what we can do to minimize that. So, we have a couple of guests joining us that's going to help us dive into that, who've not only lived that chaos, but they've been some of the leaders to take measures to help their crew and clients avoid it. Today, I want to welcome Mike Aubry, Director of Field Operations, who spent the last 25 years in the industry, spanning everything from building sets in a warehouse to sales to running full shows. So I'm pretty sure he's seen a few things. I also want to welcome George Flores, who has spent the last 12 years living and breathing shows. He's done everything from providing his technical expertise to coordinating labor, and now he's managing crews full-time all across the country. So welcome, George and Mike. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Good morning.
All right. Well, today, like we talked about, we want to dive into the responsibility that we all have in creating this chaos. You know, I think it's everything from the clients who are doing the shows to the event production companies to the crew that's working it. We all have a role that we play in either adding to the chaos or minimizing the chaos. So I want to start with one question. Why are things so chaotic?
I'll jump in first. Part of the reason is a lot of times you have a lot of different companies working on a singular event. So you have multiple companies, you have technicians from, 3 or 4 different companies, all with different disciplines, all dressed in black. They all look like they're there to do the exact same job we're there to do. And it's hard to distinguish between who's on your team, who's not on your team, who you're taking, instruction from, and who is working in a completely different area than you are. So when you get there, you're walking around and you're looking for where you need to be. It's often tough just to distinguish, who you're working with that day if you haven't, already had experience with that company.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the goal is to blend in, right? But at the same time, be distinguishable, right? Have a distinct skill set. And how do you blend in but stand out at the same time? So curious, George, what do you do at show sites that help you manage crews who all look the same, right? They're all dressed the same. How do you identify who's in lighting versus audio? Like, how do you do that today?
Well, with these events that I'm on, and they typically are very large events, it's really a matter of just communication. Letting the crew know, hey, this is going to be our meeting point every time. When we check in the morning, when we get ready to go on break, we get ready to go on lunch. This is going to be the area that we want to meet in, so that there's no confusion when we're getting mixed up. Because we do oftentimes cross over with other crews. It happens on the same event. Even you may have another sourced, labor group that's there, and so you've got a mix of all these people. So really, just communication and trying to have one place where everyone meets each other at the same time.
Awesome. Well, what piece of advice? I mean, so much of our industry left, and then a huge portion of our industry is retiring. They're at the age where they're looking to wind down, right? So we've got to figure out how do we groom this next generation of event professionals. And so what one piece of advice would you give to someone new entering our industry?
I am going to steal a line from one of our marketplace specialists. She had a great line that she used when talking to some new guys and gals coming into the industry. And it has nothing to do with your technical abilities or anything like that. It's just every day is going to feel like your first day for a while. When you get to show site, you might have parked in one place one day, and the next day it's completely different. One day there's food, next day there isn't. Every show is different, every crew is different, and you need to be prepared for that. That it's not going to be easy to settle in right in the beginning. You're going to feel like the odd duck out for a while, and just know that that's what's going to happen. It's not bad. It's not anything that you're doing wrong. It's just something you have to get used to. And once you get used to it, then it becomes second nature. But those first few shows are going to be a little bit of a struggle, but you'll get through it.
That's where the personal growth happens, right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah,
Yes.
that's great. What about you, George? What advice would you
Well,
give?
well, just to kind of attach to what Mike said, going out as a crew chief for us, I feel like that some days too. Like it's the first one, learning every time, whether it be technical things that I'm learning or learning just interactions with different people. And my advice to somebody entering the industry would be, don't believe that you'll ever reach a day where you will know it all. You won't. Ever, ever, ever. Come with a mind hungry for knowledge and ask a lot of questions. There are many great technicians that are willing to help you. And the amazing thing about our industry is that there's just always room to grow. It never stops.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what do you think our industry needs that it does not have right now?
This goes back to a lot of people being new in the industry, but I think we need more mentors. People that are willing to share their craft, take someone under their wing, be it one person, be it 10 people. It's just, I had a mentor. He took me under his wing, showed me the ropes, gave me enough knowledge that I could go out and find the rest on my own. But just somebody that was there for me and someone I could like bounce things off from was very important to me. And I think we need more of that.
Agree. How about you, George? What do you see?
Yeah, absolutely. With speaking of mentors, that leads right into training. I think, we really need more accessible, and I say the word accessible, opportunities for technician training, just helping technicians get more knowledge, grow their skill sets, be more marketable. And really, when a trained crew arrives on site, everybody wins. Like every single person on site wins when you have a trained crew. So I really do hope for more opportunities for technicians to get training.
Yep. Both great, great, great observations. Yeah, I've always had such respect, especially these large shows that, you've got 50 people that you're responsible for managing and understanding who's showing up to do what. So any tips from either of you on things that either the crew can do or the production companies can do to help you further distinguish which of these 50 people should be working in my breakouts versus the others? I mean, sometimes people are familiar, right? And sometimes it's brand new people that you don't know who to look for. You don't know their name. You don't really know their skill set. So, any tricks that you all have used to kind of help you speed up that familiarity process?
Well, one thing that's important for the crew to do that they can take some of that chaos away from themselves is to read their notes and their job description very carefully.
Hmm.
A lot of times people show up and they don't even know what job they're there to do. They know they're there to work for this event, but they don't know if they're in breakouts or if they're in lighting because they have multiple disciplines, so they could do a lot of different things and they don't even realize that they're supposed to be working in the breakouts versus helping hang lights. And I think George has a very good example of something that he's done in the past that helps distinguish those people right right from a glance. So I'll
Do
let George
tell.
run with
Yes, do tell, George.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been very fortunate to have worked with some clients in the past that, oftentimes they send a lot of their own leads to kind of work with our own crews. So they'll send audio leads, they'll send video leads, they'll send lighting leads, they'll even send, the two spots, L2s and A2s and V2s. And so when you have a crew that you're taking on site to work with these leads, no one knows anybody. Oftentimes I get on site, I'm meeting these people for the first time as well. And I've worked with some clients that were really great about, identifying who these leads are. Hey, this is who you report to. So guys would show up with, badges, name tags, just things that would help us know, hey, I have a question about this LED wall. There's 10 people over there. I don't know who to talk to. So I was on a site recently for us, and it was a very large crew. And, it was one of those deals that we had so many different, like Mike mentioned earlier, areas to work in, breakouts, in general session, lighting, video, audio. I mean, just you name it. There was every kind of technician there. So what I did was I put together some name tags, and I can kind of show you here.
Love
So
it.
you can see here, we've got Jerry S in the blue, we've got George C in the red, Cosmo K in the green, and what we did here was, just said, okay, blue's going to be audio today, red's going to be lighting, green is going to be video, and so for the crew and myself, that was a good way to distinguish, who was in what area. Names, techs really appreciate when you're able to call them by name all the time, which
Yes.
I've learned is so important, versus hey you, come over here. When you can really get that familiarity and just be able to call someone by their name, they appreciate it so much. So I really would encourage clients, as you're sending out technicians to show sites, take the time, spend the money, the resources to identify your crew. It really will help everybody on site. I think doing those kinds of things, name tags, badges, wristbands, they go a long way. And I think clients should really invest in those tools to help things be, like we said, more or less chaotic on site.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you just made that I want to spend another minute on it because I think our industry struggles, right? Because the companies expect their crew to be an extension of them, right? But it's really hard to do that when they're treated as a number, right? If I'm showing up to do something for you, you want me to feel a part of what you're doing. And that doesn't happen when it's, hey, you. It definitely shows you're interested in me as a human being showing up to work for you and to provide my talents and skill sets. When you go a step further, and it's such, I mean, these are not like heavy lifts, but you saying that you took the time to put a name to these people, right? Not only that, but to organize it further by saying a yellow tag means you're in lighting, blue means you're in audio, right? It just further helps people identify with what their role is in the success of the show. And so I don't want to skip over that because I think that's such a small thing to do that has such a big impact. If we want these people to feel a part of the success of the show, they're just not going to do that when you treat them like a number. So I think that's such a great recommendation to make. So kudos to you for doing that and instilling that. I'm sure it went a long way with the company, their client, and certainly with the crew that you were managing. And let's face it, it probably made your job easier too, right? So that's a
Absolutely.
win for
Most
everybody.
definitely.
So that's
Yep.
awesome. Um, well, what are some things, what are some other things that you think companies, the event company can do, not the person, not the end client, but the event production companies can do to help minimize the chaos at the show site?
Well, one thing that they definitely have to do more pre-planning, and part of that goes to setting realistic schedules.
What do you mean by that? What does
No,
that mean by realistic schedule?
so instead of booking someone for a 5 hour call, knowing you're going to work 10 hours that day, because oftentimes the technician can't work past 5 hours because that's all they allotted themselves because that's what was expected of them. So they'll book technicians for 5 hours, knowing that they're going to go much longer than 5 hours, but they don't want to have to cut back later. That's a very fine line to walk because you don't want to disappoint the crew by taking hours away from them, but you also don't want to leave yourself short when they can't stay later than the scheduled time. And we've run into this quite a bit, and
Common
it's
problem.
some
Yeah, we hear it all the time.
yeah, and I think the better option is to definitely do a little bit more pre planning. Try to understand. I mean, there's always going to be things that pop out of nowhere,
Mhm.
right? The venue isn't ready, trucks show up late. Those things are going to happen. But if you schedule your day properly, even when things pop up, you're going to have um, a better game plan. You're going to be able to roll with the punches a lot
Yeah,
easier.
because you're
Um,
anticipating that things are not always going to go as planned. So we should just go ahead and anticipate for that and have a plan B and communicate that.
right. Another thing I think that these production companies can do is know what they're asking for. You know, a lot of times they'll ask for 5 stagehands,
Mhm.
and then when they get to show site, they really wanted those people to be audio people or video people.
Why does
And
that
a
disconnect
stagehand,
happen so much? Because I know that happens all the time too, right? So the company's frustrated because I've got a stagehand when I really needed an audio person, but I thought at the time I needed stagehands. The stagehand is frustrated because they're being asked to do something that either isn't in their wheelhouse necessarily, or let's just face it, it would garner a different pay rate to do some of the things they're asked to do, right? So why does that continue to happen, and how can companies minimize that? I mean, there are going to be times when you're caught off guard, but what can they do to keep that? Because that's a big issue that leaves a sour taste in both the company's mouth and the crew member. So what can they do to minimize that?
well, I think that they, for lack of a better word, I think they need to not worry about, you know, the budget as much, because in the long run, they're adding money to their budget when they don't have a qualified technician on site. So if they book an audio guy, or let's just say a general AV person, they book a general AV person. That person can always step back a skill set easily. They can always become a stagehand without any effort.
Yeah.
The stagehand can't always step up to that general AV position because they don't have the skill set yet. And part of what we go through is there's different terms that people use across the United States. Stagehands are pretty widely known to be the guys on the show.
Mhm.
And if a production company just books stagehands thinking they're going to get the entire gambit
Yeah.
of what you know can be done, they're going to be very disappointed in the long run.
Yeah.
So I,
Yeah,
they can
absolutely.
work with our team to go over what the um, skill set is needed. I would recommend that for sure, instead of just assuming a stagehand can do
Yeah.
everything. Talk to the marketplace specialists, or to other members of their own team, maybe, to get a little bit more accurate assessment of what is needed on show site, versus just, well, I just need some stagehands. Send me some stagehands and we'll make it
Do you
work.
think this is a question for both of you? Do you think they're doing that because they're trying to operate within the budget that the show was sold?
Unfortunately, I think that does lend to a lot of this. I know for a fact some companies will book the lowest end, and then you know bump up when
Right.
needed. So I'll book 10 stagehands, and if I need one of those guys to work on an LED wall, then I only got to pay for one guy to work on an LED wall. Whether he has the right skill set or not, I'm going to move him over there, and instead of just booking the LED technicians from the get
So do
go,
you think the shows
it's
are not like in that example? And we're going to talk about this in a separate episode, because so much of the chaos that I think happens downstream is a result of what happens upstream when it's sold, right? How it's sold, the time frame, the turnaround. Anything is possible, right? It just may cost you more, right? So if you really need
yeah.
an LED person, put it in the proposal. Don't propose stagehands when, don't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? Like, sell the appropriate things that you're going to need, so then you have the budget to go get the resources. Same with gear, right? Same with all of it, right? If you're appropriating the correct amount for the budget, a lot of the chaos goes away because you've got margin, you've got, you know an amount in there to account for that. You're delivering on what you sold versus trying to deliver on something that doesn't really mesh well with what was sold. So I think that's an important takeaway, is so much of the chaos that happens at the show site starts with how it's sold and the expectations, right? That you put on the team based on how it's sold. So if you need an LED engineer, sell it that way. Don't sell a stagehand, because then a stagehand's going to show up and you're going to be disappointed. And that stagehand's going to be disappointed, right? Because they want to do a good job. And then when you're asking them to do something that isn't in their wheelhouse, that's frustrating for them too, because everyone shows up with the good intention of doing a great job. So I think that's a really, really important point. Um, so thank you for that. I think that's great. George, do you have anything to add on that? On what can these companies do to make it less chaotic?
Yeah, definitely. So, just to kind of add on to what Mike said, I saw this with my former company as a labor coordinator, and even now going out for us is budgets play such a huge role in what kind of chaos or execution happens on site. So what I'm seeing a lot is budgets are getting really tight on labor calls, not just the positions that these technicians are being asked to work, but also the size of the crews. So what I've seen recently in the last few months is we've got these good sized loading crews, very practical, enough people to cover every area, enough people to do the job safely and do it well. And then we get up to load in time and it's half that size or less
Hmm.
of that crew. And generally we have a lot of the same technicians on both sides of these events. So I'll see less than half of them on the out and they'll look at me like, well, where's everybody else? And it's like, I'm sorry, this is it. This is all they ordered, and we kind of look at each other like, well, we've got these 30-foot screens and tons of truss and lighting and pipe and drape and LED wall and 30K projectors and all these things that needed that manpower to get set up, and now we've got less than half of that to actually
To
do the
do it.
job. So I really would love for clients to consider, when you are staffing these events, safety first. What kind of numbers are you looking at to get things loaded in? And then trying not to really go too far from that when you're loading out. I understand it's going to be less people, but I'm seeing kind of an extreme on site quite a bit to where it's just a fraction of that crew. And I think if they really are starting to think a little bit more, budget minded and safety
Hmm.
minded on these outs, it's really going to help these crews, execute it and be safe at doing it.
Got it. So we've talked about what the end client can do. We've talked about what the event production company can do. What's the crew member's role? What's the tech's role? What's their responsibility to make sure they have a less chaotic experience and the customer has a less chaotic experience? What can they do?
We touched on it a little bit before, but they need to read their notes. They need to know what their position is. They need to make sure that they're qualified for the position, because we find a lot of times techs try to build themselves up a little higher than what they really are. Right? Oh, I can do that. I can do that. But then when they get there, they struggle and they're afraid to admit that they need some
Hmm.
help. So they should definitely understand the position they're applying for and make sure that they aren't getting in over their head. And the last thing is ask
Hmm.
questions. Don't assume things. Don't guess at things. Ask questions. If you're unsure about something, ask the lead for us. Ask the client. Ask whoever is the most relevant. But just ask questions. Don't leave it up to
Yep.
guesswork.
Good insight. Georgie, you have anything to add to that?
Everything Mike is saying, it's spot on, and the word communicate is so big because it works with leads on site, it works with your crew. So as a technician, if I'm going on site, really knowing how to communicate, being on time, and if I can't be on time, just communicate, let your lead know this happened, I'm going to be late, but I will be there.
Hmm.
And one of the most important things for me is when you're working on a crew, really trying to adopt that team attitude. And what that means is, that team attitude is me having that willingness to step into any space needed and to help the crew and the client get the job done. So, understanding I'm here as a part of a team, and I'm going to be asked to do things. I'm going to have to step over and do other things. I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm not going to get frazzled. I'm just going to jump in and be aggressive and crush it. So, team attitude is such a huge part of being part of a audiovisual crew.
So true. Well, obviously, I mean, I think there are a lot of things in the event industry that are complicated, chaotic, and the reality is they should be. The nature of what we do is hard. It is complicated. There are so many moving parts, right? So I don't think the answer is everything should be easy and that's, it's all attainable, because the reality is the nature of what we do, it is chaotic and it is complicated. So are there any areas of producing a show that everyone should just continue to expect, hey, this part, it's always going to be chaotic. Like that's just the nature of it. There are things we can do to minimize it, but you should have the expectation that these aspects, it's complicated. So because of that, it's going to be a little chaotic. So any areas that you would identify that way?
You're never going to get away from multiple companies working on a single event, and they're going to be 30 or 40 people on the crew that aren't even part of
Hmm.
your team. And knowing the difference between what you're doing, what they're doing. I've had instances where I've had a guy working for 4 or 5 hours for a different company just because he blended in with the wrong set of guys. Yeah, that sounds. Oh, he got mixed up with the wrong crew. But I mean, that does what happens, right? They'll start hanging lights. And you're like, you weren't supposed to be over there. What have you been doing all day? Well, I've been hanging lights with those guys. He was working. He was confused, and it's very confusing. So it's our job as leads and crew chiefs on show site to make sure that our people are in the right place. That's what we do well. I think that some other companies maybe don't do as well as we have a lead or a crew chief on every event, and it's their job to make sure people are in the right place at the right time. Never going to be perfect, but because we have that leadership on show site, I think it lends to less of that happening than I can't tell you how many times I've seen, like, I've had people show up working under me, and I'm like, are you working for
Yeah.
me? It's very easy to get mixed up and go in the wrong direction, and now you're operating a breakout room, and you were there to build an LED wall. It's very
Yeah.
easy to happen, and I'm sure George got some instances that are very much the same, but that's the biggest thing I think that you're never going to get away from. There's always going to be a late truck. There's always going to be a venue that's not ready on time. Uh, that stuff is always going to happen, and we have no control over it. But the stuff that we do have control over, still going to be a little bit of chaos, but we can minimize it and control it. It's
Yeah.
controlled chaos, right? We can control it a little bit better. The things that are in our power, we can control. The things that are not, late trucks, venues, those kinds of things, we can't control. So, I think we should put the focus on the things that we can
Love
control.
it. George, you have anything to add to that?
Well, I really love that Mike brought this up, talking about how, one of the things that I believe we do great is, we have leads on site that we're expecting to really, move around, make sure people are staying on task, make sure they're in the right place. And I can give you an example for myself. So I was on a show recently for us a couple of months ago, and it was a client I had worked with before. We got the crew checked in, everybody working, everybody's doing a great job. But I was moving around, going and standing by lighting, watching what they were doing. Then I'd go over to video, see what they were up to with screens. I'd run by audio, see what was happening with line arrays. And the client actually stopped me at some point and said, "Huh, this is interesting. You're a lead, for Lasso here." And he's like, "I'm not used to having leads that actually are involved with the crew." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" He said, "Well, most of the leads I work with other companies, they check everybody in, and then they go over to that table and they sit on their laptop all
Mm,
day." And he goes, "So this is kind of strange for me that you're over here helping, push some cases, and you're helping, just make sure people are in the right place. You're answering questions from your crew. You're helping some of the guys that are a little more green, understand
yeah.
what they're working on." And so I was kind of taken back by that, because I said, I'm happy to be here. And I said, that's just what
Hmm.
we do. And this is expected of anyone working as a lead for us. So I was really surprised by
Yeah.
that, just to hear that it exists. There are companies, there are individuals in the industry where, there are leads on site that don't necessarily, take an investment in their crew other than just making
Yeah.
sure they're there. And like Mike said, you've got to move around, you've got to make sure people are in the right place, you're going to mesh with other crews, so you've got to make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to be working on. And yeah, that's going to kind of stick in my head for a long time, because I'd never heard that before.
So I would love to ask each of you a couple of questions that doesn't necessarily have to do with chaos at the show site, but I think it's insightful and it's always interesting when I ask techs these questions. So would love your input, given each of your roles. But Why did each of you decide to stay in the industry when 38% left?
For myself personally, I love this industry. I've been doing it a long time. There isn't another job on earth like this one. I didn't start my professional career in this industry. I kind of happened into it, but there isn't a job I love coming to do more than this one. I was a diesel mechanic before this, and sure, it paid the bills, and I was pretty good at it, but you don't enjoy it the way you enjoy coming into what we do. You never know what you're getting into. You could be working on a WWE WrestleMania one week, and the next week you're listening to doctors talk about how they cut open eyeballs. You just never know what you're gonna get, and it's fun. It's the spontaneity of it is great, and I love it. I can't think of anything I'd rather do than work in this industry.
What about you, George? Why'd you decide to stay in the industry?
What he said, everything he said. No,
Yeah, it's true.
it was a very interesting time because my wife and I, at the time of the pandemic, were exploring to move to Houston from DFW. And, we finally made the decision to make that move. She got a new job, and great job. But when we got to Houston, there wasn't a ton of work out here. And I didn't know many technicians. I didn't know local companies. Um, and so at that point, I certainly considered exploring a different career path. I thought, maybe this is the time to move on to something else. So I kind of pondered that. But like Mike said, the reality was I love working in corporate AV. I absolutely love it. I really felt like I had a lot left to offer, not just to clients that I was working for, but even more to the technicians that I was working side by side with.
Mhm.
I find it really rewarding to help technicians find more work. And I really enjoy training and mentoring techs, especially ones that are new to the industry. And, in the long run, I just wasn't ready to let that go. I was not ready to say, I'm done with this.
Thanks you both for staying,
Thank
truly,
you.
because we need great people who have a great outlook on life, who are optimistic, who are curious, who want to enhance their skill set, who want to do a good job, who have a level of professionalism. Like we need more. So thank you both for staying. It's
Absolutely.
meaningful.
Well, that summer of 2021, I had to sit down with my wife and said, look, if I don't start picking up work by September, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go
Mhm.
start looking. We'll do something else and we'll be okay. September came. I have not looked back. And we're now in July of 2022. Like it just fell in my lap. I started working for different companies. I started networking with technicians. I started working more for Lasso in the marketplace, and it was amazing. So I'm really happy with the decision to stick around.
I feel like the word lead, it doesn't give justice to what they're there for, right? Like lead is such a common word in our industry. But the reality is it stands for leadership at the show site. That's very different than I'm a lead, I'm kind of in control, I'm kind of like clocking people in and out. That has a different connotation than I'm providing leadership, right? Whether it's training, whether it's attitudes, keeping everybody in a positive place, whether it's bridging any gaps in communication, like we need leadership at the show site, right? Because that is what minimizes chaos. And it's kind of like, parenting when you have kids. If you're not going to discipline the kids and provide leadership and guidance and rules, like rules of engagement, it's chaotic. The kids are ruling the roost, and that's not how it's intended. And it's frustrating for the kids, right? Same. And I'm not comparing, crew to kids. But I'm just saying, like everyone in life desires structure. They desire leadership. And the more leadership we can provide at the show site, the better everyone's going to feel. So I just feel like that word lead, I know it's here to stay. I don't think it justly describes the leadership responsibility that that title has. So I think that's great. Well, one last question for you all before we wrap up. Just kind of curious, how do you manage your own stress and the stress of the crew and the client. There's all these different personalities that you're having to kind of balance at show site. So what do you do to manage stress?
When I'm on a show and I can see the client is getting stressed, the best thing that I can do, and this goes for the crew as well, is to work with empathy and
Mm,
urgency. You know, I've been in your place. I understand what you're going through, and I am
mm,
going through it with you. And let's work together to make this happen, whatever the situation is, and then work with urgency. It's great to do all that, to say all that, and let them know, but then they have to see your actions also, that you are proactively trying to move some things around and make things happen, or get some more people on the phone to get them down to show. So whatever the issue is that they're having, just let them know that you are there for them, you're there with them, and you're working
yeah.
to the same goal. And that sets them in a little bit better place. They understand that, hey, you're in it with them, and it's not just, I'm here to do a job. We're here
Yeah.
to do this
I love
together.
that word urgency, which again has the connotation of chaos, right? But I like to think of things like I love the phrase intentional urgency, right? It's going to be chaotic, but when you have intent behind it, like this is purposeful, it's planned, things are not coming at me. I am proactive in this urgency. And so I feel like that minimizes the chaos when it's intentional urgency versus everyone's urgent, just running around crazy, with their heads cut off. Like, that just feeds differently versus, we have a plan for this. And yeah, we need to move quickly because this is the goal and we're on pace for it. And, let's keep moving type of thing. George, what do you do to manage stress?
This is a tough one because it's different at every event, and it's always a challenge to find that
Mm,
happy medium, between, like Mike mentioned, having that urgency, but also showing that you care. So I really believe that my delivery and my tone with the crew sets everything. How you address the crew really with that very first interaction can affect the whole day, and it can affect the entire week. I really try at the beginning to make sure to express how thankful I am to be working side by side with each member, and then I really try to emphasize the fact that we're a team, and just by emphasizing that, hey, like Mike said, I'm here with you, I'm here to help you, I'm here to help you succeed. Emphasizing team really goes a long way. When a tech is told, by somebody in leadership, we can't do this without you, we can't make this happen without your skills, they really start to
mm,
understand how valued they are. And finally, one of the big ones is just walking with grace amid all the challenges in the industry, post pandemic, labor shortage. I really have to remember when I'm on site, these are the people that showed up. They showed up and they are here ready to work. And so, I try to push them and have that urgency, but I really try in the process to build them up as well. It's really important for me to foster an environment of mutual support and success to really, reach our goals
I
on
love
site.
that. I feel like there's so many great takeaways from what you all have shared. As we wrap up, I kind of think of we talked about a number of things. We talked about not just having chaos, but controlled chaos, right? And there are things we can do to control that chaos. We talked about pre planning, being organized, having the right budget, asking for the right things. You talked about team communication, and most importantly, humanizing it, right? Everyone is there with the same urgency, with the same goal, with the same outcome. And to your point, those are the ones that showed up. And at the end of the day, you are a team. It's not, that's my outsourced labor, that's my leads, that's my, so and so, that's the guy you don't not ever want to talk to because he knows it all, right? Like you are one team there with one common goal. And the more we can all do to humanize that and to make everyone really understand the part they play in that so they can be proud after that show happens successfully. I think that's such an important part. That my hope for our industry is that we can do that. We should be a little kinder, a little nicer, a lot less angry. And remember, we are all there with the same purpose. And so, again, some things are going to be chaotic. but it doesn't have to be. And I think we can control some of that. So thank you both so much for participating today. I think there's so many great nuggets we can all take. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io.